The crystal pendants of lumen scattered city light across the mirrored walls like flares on dark water. Julian Ashford, 34, co-founder and CEO of Axiom Systems, sat with two Berlin venture magnates whose combined portfolios could tilt markets. He ordered in fluent German without looking up, the language slipping off his tongue like steam from a rare steak. Power for Julian was ease. He didn't register the server until a glass of water arrived with a slip of heavy stationery tucked under its base. She had a dancer's poise, a low bun pinned with a brass clip, and a plain black dress that fit too perfectly to be off the rack. Her eyes, cool green, assessed the table, then moved on. She did not smile. Julian never read notes at the table. He did now. You're being filmed. 2 tables behind you, navy tie, do not react. M. The back of his neck prickled. He lifted his wine, let the goblet's curve reflect a sliver of the dining room. Navy tie. Phone angled not toward a plate but toward a mouth. The man looked down at the screen just as Julian looked away. He kept speaking German to the investors. Growth curves, regulatory harmonization. Unser Produkt ist die Infrastruktur. While his thoughts snapped into formation, the server returned for their entrees. Anything else? She asked in unaccented English, but when her gaze flicked to Julian, she added, sotto voce. Blue tie is switching to a lapel mic. He'll brush against your chair on the way to the bar. How do you know? Julian asked, lips barely moving. I've worked here long enough to read a room, she said. Also, you're not the only one who speaks languages. The corner of her mouth tilted. Count to 5 and drop your napkin. At 5, Julian fumbled the linen. He went down after it, and the bug brushed harmlessly across the back of his chair. When he rose, a different security reality settled over the table. His driver texting that the exterior camera had caught the navy tie earlier, loitering, sending bursts of data. The investors, charmed by Julian's composure, signed term sheets on the spot. Only after they left did he find the server again, pinning a crooked frame near the bar, as if the gallery walls obeyed her hands. What do I call you? Julian asked. She considered. Mira. Thank you, Mira. For what? For reading the room. He held up the note. And for the ink. She took the paper and slid it into her apron as if it were a playing card. Be careful, she said. People who record never stop at first takes. How did you see it? I was taught to watch the angles. Then, almost as an afterthought, and you ordered your steak with a Viennese cadence. The men in navy ties usually follow men who talk like that. He wanted to ask 100 questions. How did she know about mics? Why was her posture too erect for service work? Why did her German, when she murmured Auf Wiedersehen to a departing couple, carry the grace notes of money and old winters? Instead, he tipped too much and left. In the car, he told his head of security, Marcus Vale, to sweep the table, the corridor, the lavatories. Marcus found adhesive residue under a chair. Professional, he texted. Not amateur gossip capture, industrial. Julian stared out at the city. The night looked different now, as if mirrored glass showed not his reflection but the angle of attack. He told himself he returned to Lumen the next evening to test the restaurant's security. He sat in a corner banquette and watched Mira teach a new hire to decant a Barolo. She spoke softly, not explaining but instructing, and the young man straightened as if a spine had been granted. Julian rose when she walked by. Coffee, after your shift. That's not usually how this works, she said. It isn't a date. He wasn't sure that was true. I have questions about microphones. Her eyes searched his face, measuring the ratio of arrogance to sincerity. "Midnight," she said. "Cafe on 47th Ellipses. Don't bring anyone you can't trust." "Anyone?" She looked past him, toward the door, where the navy tie reappeared, as if summoned by her thought. "Especially your shadow." Julian's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Deal." At midnight, Ellipses smelled of burnt sugar and newspaper ink. Mira arrived in jeans and a gray sweater, hair down, the brass clip now a small sun in her pocket. She wrapped her hands around a mug, like someone who remembered cold in her bones. "Why help me?" he asked. She met his gaze. "Because the last time I didn't warn someone, a company collapsed and a woman went to prison for something she didn't do." She lifted the mug. "I learned to read the angles. I've been reading ever since." "Who are you, Mira?" She looked toward the window where the city made constellations out of cabs. "Someone who learned that powerful men can steal a life with a signature." Her mouth hardened. "And someone who came here to remain invisible." "You failed," Julian said softly. "I know," she said, and for the first time she smiled, quick, rueful, alive. "You saw me, outside somewhere. A camera woke. Inside a story did." They met again, and again. In the quiet past midnight hours, in booths with scarred wood and baristas who looked the other way, Mira slowly traded silence for nouns. She refused last names and dates, then surrendered them in pieces like valuables slid under a door. "My name is Mirella Kovac," she said at last. "But that's only half true. The papers say Mira Klein now. The real name is the one people used when they invited me to speak at conferences about supply chains and corporate ethics." She watched his face to see whether the words landed. "I was the heir presumptive to Kovac Textilwerke in Vienna." Julian didn't flinch. "You were framed." She blinked. "You're very efficient." "I'm an optimizer," he said. "I move from suspicion to hypothesis to model. Keep going." She drank. Victor Neumann, charming like a stage magician. He courted me, courted my board, courted the press. Then, over months, he learned my passwords. Couples do that when they're careless, and transferred 50 million in staggered amounts through shells, with my signature wrapped around them like ribbon. Her hand shook once, then stilled. He left me a choice: prison or disappearance. I chose the latter. I had help. "Family?" Julian asked. "My grandmother. She sold paintings he thought were sentimental and paid a woman who knew how to peel me out of my life like a silk lining." Mira laughed without humor. "Victor married my cousin the next season. The papers called it destiny." "And the police believe the forgeries?" Julian asked. "The police believe the evidence handed to them by men in better suits." She set down the cup. "I'm telling you because last night you didn't throw your weight around. You listened to a stranger and pretended to drop a napkin." Her eyes lifted. "That's rare," Julian said. "Let me help." "Don't," she said instantly. "He eats men like you for brunch. Brave, impatient, excellent with numbers. He'll make an example of your company and your people." "My people knew the risks when I hired them," Julian said. "They came to build something that mattered." "Then don't turn them into collateral damage," she said, voice quiet and flint. "I've been running for 2 years to avoid exactly that." He wanted to argue. Instead, he asked questions. He asked about dates and servers, about who had access to which piece of code, about whose handwriting could be motion-tracked into a counterfeit signature curve. He learned that Victor's family invested in law enforcement charitable funds, that a Viennese deputy minister owed him favors, that prosecutors enjoyed his vineyards. Julian walked back to his penthouse through a city that had never looked less like freedom, and more like grid paper. He opened a secure terminal and called Marcus Vale. "I want every public and private trace on Victor Neumann," he said. "Shells, bribes, mistresses, attorneys, foundations, escrow. Assume the walls are ears." "Risk level?" Marcus asked. "Max," Julian said, "and off the books." 3 nights later, he texted Mira a single sentence. "I think I found his thumbprint." She hesitated, then came. He showed her transaction maps like constellations. "Look here," Julian said, fingers beating soft rhythms against the desk. "This is where the signature diverges from your encryption lattice. Neumann's people replicated your signing micro-jitter well enough to fool a cursory glance, but they didn't replicate your device metadata. It's an approximation of your keystroke cadence. Good enough for a bank, not for me." Mira leaned closer. The screen lit the fine scar near her temple he'd noticed at Lumen. She exhaled. He practiced on small amounts to build a profile. "Trial balloons," Julian said. "We have timestamp conflicts, too. Vienna time, 3:47 a.m. You were in London giving a keynote at 8. I found CCTV footage of you leaving the hotel at 6. You can't be in 2 places at once." Mira looked at him as if someone had set down an heirloom she'd thought burned. "If we go public, he crushes us in court," she said. "He still owns the story." "Then we don't give him a court," Julian said. "We give him a flood. Regulators, journalists, Interpol, a wall of sound." She shook her head. "You don't understand. He has friends, ministers, editors who owe favors. He will turn your investors against you before sunrise." He glanced at the city. He had built his life on calculated risk. This felt like jumping off a cliff into black water and finding wings on the way down. He met her eyes. "Let me be stubborn on your behalf." Something like hope flared in her expression and vanished, as if hope were contraband. "Why?" she asked. "Because what happened to you is an engineer's nightmare, a system designed to reward power, not accuracy," he said. "And because I'm not sleeping until the math balances." The secure phone on his desk vibrated. "Marcus, tail on you. Same navy tie, 3rd sighting." Julian looked to the window. Mira followed his gaze with predator stillness. "They found me," she whispered. "They found us," he corrected, and realized the us had already slipped out of his mouth like a vow. "Don't be noble," she said. "Be practical," he asked. "Be alive," she said. "Then come with me," he said. "We do this together or not at all." Her answer was a single, terrified, defiant nod. Outside, sirens stitched 2 burrows together. Inside, 2 people who had never asked for rescue chose it anyway. Julian's penthouse had been designed for watching storms roll over the park. It turned out to be excellent for laying siege to a ghost. Overnight, his war room bloomed, air-gapped laptops, a whiteboard web of shells and trust accounts, a corkboard of headshots that made Victor Neumann look less like a lover and more like entropy in a suit. Mira stood at the windows, silhouette inked against the city. "You live like the world can't touch you," she said softly. "Professional illusion," he said, teeing up a secure dataset. "Watch." They watched transfers that looked legitimate until you looked too closely. They watched trial amounts become braids of theft. They watched a digital forgery curve that nearly matched Mira's, a fraction too smooth where her hand always trembled on the downstroke. "This is enough," Julian said, voice low. "It won't be narratively satisfying, but it will be prosecutorially irresistible." She laughed, startled by the phrase. "Narratively satisfying? Everything is a story," he said. "We just forgot that balance sheets tell one too." He should not have been standing so close. She should not have turned so slightly to find him there. but the room had contracted to the length of his breath. He traced the air near her cheekbone without touching. "We can stop," he said. "We can't," she answered. "Then don't let me pretend it's purely altruism," he said, and the private honesty shocked him. She lifted her chin. "Don't let me pretend I didn't hope you'd say that." Her hand rose, hovered over his chest, and found the rhythm of his heart, as if measuring tempo before joining a duet. He kissed her like someone deleting old code, carefully, ruthlessly, knowing the system would never be the same. It was not convenient. It was not wise. It was the first true thing either of them had done in years that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with choosing. The encrypted phone vibrated on the desk. Marcus again. Recommend immediate relocation. Her safe house compromised by unknown third party. A second text from a burner. Found you, darling. Vienna misses you. V. The world narrowed to a point. We're leaving, Julian said. You're leaving, Mira countered. We, he repeated, already moving. He called Marcus, gave addresses that existed only on paper, then guided Mira to an elevator that didn't open unless you knew where to touch the steel. The safe suite was a fortress hidden as a boutique hotel room. Ballistic glass, overlapping camera fields, doors that sealed like lips. For 30 hours they breathed behind walls that hummed with electricity. Julian fielded calls from board members who did not understand why he had put the company into fortress mode, why the Shanghai deal suddenly required background checks for their background checks. Your investors will mutiny, Mira said, hands tight around a cup she didn't drink. They can, he said. I've survived worse. Have you survived betrayal, she asked, not meaning Victor. He didn't answer, because the secure line rang with the answer. Sterling, he said. Sir, Marcus said, voice compressed air. We've had a breach at headquarters. Files compromised. 2 injuries. Entry was surgical. Inside help? Julian asked, tasting metal. Yes. He hung up and looked at Mira. She was already shaking her head. I won't be the reason you lose what you built. You aren't the reason, he said. But grief edged his words. Then prove it, she said. Choose them instead of me. There are moments when love is a 1,000-page novel. There are moments when it is a single, bad sentence you wish you could unsay. Maybe I did make poor decisions, Julian said, brittle. The silence that followed made "we" sound like a word in a dead language. He left because the building bled. He left because the company he'd built out of coffee and hallway bets was under attack. He left because pride spoke louder than tenderness. Just that once. Alone in the safe suite, Mira packed the one suitcase she had not unpacked in 2 years. Her phone lit with a message from an Austrian number she did not recognize, but knew. Miss me? Come home. The tremor that moved through her was not fear but fury, old and cold. When the door opened, she expected men with strangers' faces. It was Marcus, implacable, with 3 operatives whose suits fit like exoskeletons. Miss Klein, Marcus said, formal for the first time. Mr. Ashford requests your presence. He changed his mind, she asked, too tired to lacquer it with irony. He found something, Marcus said, and he's very, very angry. Back at headquarters, the wreckage looked staged for a trial. Glass confetti, screens black as closed eyes. In the center, Julian sat with a photograph and a face like carved storm. David Park, he said, without preamble, lifting the photo. Mira entering the safe suite, time-stamped, taken from an angle only an insider could access. My friend, my COO, 15 years. Mira stepped closer. He fed Victor our movements. Julian nodded once. and documented every transaction to cover his own back. He kept receipts. He tapped a thick folder on the desk. He gave us a map of Victor's entire network. Mira met his gaze. Then we stop running. He stood, the anger in him no longer wild but precise. We end it. They did not kiss. They did not apologize. They went to war. They named it Operation Glass River, because everything would be visible and nothing would hold its shape after. The plan was simple, in the way avalanches are simple. Release enough weight at the right angle and let gravity do the rest. Simultaneous disclosures, Julian said to the room. A dozen trusted staffers who'd signed papers with teeth. Financial regulators in Austria, Germany, the EU, Interpol's financial crimes, SEC for the U.S. listing exposure, embargoed packets to investigative desks with data bricks they can verify faster than Victor can bribe. Timed drops, redundancy everywhere. We'll be sued, someone said. We'll be attacked, someone else said. Correct, Julian said. We'll also be right. Mira watched him with a look no courtroom could enter into evidence. He coordinated like a conductor mid-symphony. Fingers, glance, the downbeat. She added her piece, a summary of Victor's technique in the precise language of a woman who had once lectured on audit trails and then learned how they could be gamed. At midnight UTC, the first packets left the room like birds flushed from trees. In Vienna, a prosecutor who owed nobody anything sat up straighter. In Hamburg, a banking compliance team canceled their weekends. In New York, a reporter with elegiac eyes opened a drop and began to smile the way wolves smile. Victor called, not Julian, Mira. Darling, he said. The endearment sounded like rope. Bold of you to find a new man to throw at me. I didn't throw him, she said. He walked. Victor laughed, delighted. Of course he did. Heroes always do. They die so beautifully. You're afraid, she said, and felt him still for half a beat. Of losing to children, he asked. Of losing to receipts, she replied, and to your own accountant. He hung up. 10 minutes later, David Park tried to run. 6 minutes after that, the federal building had him in a room whose walls did not care about his suits. He folded faster than an origami swan in rain. Everything goes through Victor's cousin's foundation, David said, hands shaking. Then to his vineyard shells. Then, look, you don't understand. It wasn't just money. It was judges. It was a web. Spiders forget they're not the web, Mira said, before she could stop herself. The flood was relentless. Frozen accounts, emergency warrants, a photograph of Victor entering a private bank whose doors would be politely locked to him by morning. A long, beautifully written piece in a paper that still believed ink mattered, charting the theft like a tragic sonata with graphs. At dawn, the city looked scrubbed. Mira stood on the roof and let cold air comb her hair. Julian joined her, a thermos in his hand, apology in his eyes. I said cruel things, he said. I did too, she said. Do you forgive me, he asked. Only if you forgive me for trying to leave before you could, she said. I don't forgive that, he said. I thank you for it. It means you were trying to save me. She took the thermos. What happens now? We wait for the weight to settle, he said. And then we do something harder. What's harder than blowing up a crime syndicate? Building something that outlasts it, he said. The call came at noon. Interpol had issued notices. Vienna's prosecutor had issued warrants. Victor's counsel had issued a statement so careful it sounded like candles in a draft. The last message came from a number Mira did not know. I'm sorry. H. Who is H? Julian asked. My cousin, Mira said. The one who married him. Helena. The next chapter, apparently, would not be only about enemies. 6 months later, sunlight cut bright rectangles across the conference room of Axiom House. The glass still bore faint newness where shards had once glittered. Mirella Kovac, the name now spoken openly on mail and microphones, stood at the head of the table, presenting quarterly results for the Kovac Initiative, a foundation seeded with the first recovered funds and designed to turn stolen money into restitution. "We've repatriated 232 million euros, she said, clicking to the slide that mattered. 72 beneficiaries across 4 jurisdictions. Our benchmark is not speed, it's accuracy, returning assets to the smallest rightful owners, not just the loudest." She took a breath. "There is a queue. We are hiring attorneys who think like engineers." The board applauded. Margot Lynn, David Park's replacement, asked a question about long-term governance. Mira answered with a plan that looked less like a white paper and more like a treaty. When the room emptied, Julian appeared with 2 coffees and a smile that took some of the formality out of the glass. "You are incandescent," he said. "Is that a technical term?" she asked. "Oh, only in my field," he said, "where we measure luminosity in arguments won and cynics disarmed." Her assistant knocked. "Miss Kovac, there's a visitor who says she's family." Mira felt the old cold try to climb her spine. "Send her in," she said. And when Helena Newman walked in, black dress, pale knuckles, eyes that had seen too much, Mira steadied. "Cousin," Helena said, voice scraped thin. "Thank you for seeing me." Julian stood by the window, deliberately unthreatening. Helena's gaze slid to him, then back to Mira. "Victor is dead," Helena said, not sitting. "He took what he believed was the only door left to him." She swallowed. "Before he did, he left. A ledger, names, transfers. Instructions drafted when he still thought he would live to bargain. I brought it." She placed a heavy envelope on the table as if it might burn through. Mira did not touch it. "Why bring it to me?" "Because I helped him hurt you," Helena said, with terrible candor. "I believed him when he said you were the thief. I wore your ring. I attended benefits paid for by your money. I was complicit, even if I didn't know how to spell it." "You were 24, Mira said. "He was a professional liar." "Being naive is not an absolution," Helena said. "Neither is grief a sentence," Julian said gently. Helena startled as if she had forgotten men could speak softly. "I have access to assets the courts released to me as his widow," Helena said, focusing again. "They were yours before he moved them. If you will accept, I will sign them back. All of them." She finally sat. It looked like surrender and decision at once. "And if there is a place for me to work, to do penance with competence, I will take it." Mira opened the envelope. The confession wasn't dramatic. It was bureaucratic, exact. Victor had left himself a map he never got to use. There, in small script, was a note. "H will bring this when the weather turns. She likes snow. He made me promises as if the future were furniture," Helena said. "I believed him because I wanted a table set for me." Her eyes shone, furious at herself. "I want something harder now." Mira looked at Julian. He didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. He held space. "The initiative needs a director of European operations," Mira said. "Vienna first, then Berlin, then Brussels. It's hard work. It will hurt before it heals." "I brought comfortable shoes," Helena said, and for the first time her mouth tried on a smile that belonged to her, and not to a man who had owned her days. They signed papers. They drank bitter coffee that tasted, for once, like a future. When Helena left, Mira leaned against the table and let out a breath she felt she had been holding since childhood. "Are you all right?" Julian asked. "I am something better," she said. "I am useful." He put the empty coffee cup aside. "One more agenda item," he said, voice suddenly formal enough to be playful. "New business." She arched an eyebrow. "Proceed, Mr. Ashford." But he only smiled, and whatever he was about to say waited for a quieter room and fewer witnesses. That night, he took her back to Lumen. The staff pretended not to notice that the couple at table 6 had been in the papers. The chandeliers still made stormlight. "Do you remember the first thing you said to me?" Julian asked as dessert landed like a moon on white porcelain. "That you were ordering steak like a Viennese?" she asked. "That was the second," he said. "The first was on a note. It said I was being filmed." "Was it good handwriting?" she asked, because teasing him was a way of measuring how far from fear they had come. "It was perfect," he said, and went to one knee between crystal and linen. "Mirella Kovac," he said, voice raw in the best way. "You broke my life and rebuilt it in a shape that makes sense. Will you marry me?" She laughed and cried, and said yes like a keynote with standing room only. Outside, the city burned quietly. Inside, ink found a new page. Snow shouldered the gables of Schloss Lindenhof, the Kovac family's ancestral house, an hour outside Vienna. The chapel smelled of beeswax and books. Mirella stood at the door in a gown that once belonged to a great-grandmother, whose portrait now seemed to wink. Julian waited at the altar in a mourning coat that made him look like someone who could sign peace treaties. The ceremony was in 2 languages because their lives were. The priest spoke of covenants. A friend read from Rilke, and then, at Mira's insistence, a paragraph from an operations manual about redundancies, because love, she said, was a system you maintained, not a miracle you watched. When they spoke their vows, there was no performance, only precision. "Julian," Mira said, "you listened to me when I was a ghost. You believed the version of me I barely remembered. I promised to argue in good faith, to tell you when the math is off, to make our work together more than work." "Mirella," he said, "you turned my algorithms toward justice. I promise to be your co-founder in all things, home, hope, ridiculous courage. I will deploy every resource I have to keep you safe, and every softness I own to keep you known." They kissed. Bells rang. The world, at least the slice of it inside the chapel, applauded like shareholders at a quarterly that beat expectations with honesty. At the reception, Helena danced with Marcus in a way that promised 3 arguments and a solution. Margot Lynn charmed diplomats into donating to the initiative's European expansion. A chalkboard listed the wines by harvest year and the pies by grandmother. Speeches were merciful and brief. The music included, at Mira's request, a waltz her grandmother loved, and, at Julian's mischievous insistence, a synth-pop track he maintained was a modern masterpiece. Later, they escaped to the library, where the fire did its ancient work. The window showed snow deciding what kind it wanted to be. Mira leaned against a shelf and watched her husband, light a candle already lit. "You know we can't stay here," she said. "Schlosses aren't for staying," he said. "They're for remembering we don't live in them." "Where next?" she asked. "New York next week," he said. "Berlin by spring. Singapore in the fall if the initiative's Asia hub comes together." "You mean when?" she corrected. "When," he conceded. "We'll hire teams who have no patience for corruption and very specific patience for paperwork." She smiled. "That's our love language." "Also coffee," he said. "And notes," she said, and drew one from her pocket. "We did it." The handwriting was steadier now. Survival had given way to momentum. He tucked the note into a first edition. For the archivists, he said. They returned to the ballroom where the night had not finished with them. Lumen's chef had flown in to recreate the menu from the evening that started everything, down to the ribeye and the truffle sauce. At table 6, someone had left a blank card and a pen as a joke or a benediction. Mira picked up the pen. "Should we leave a note for whoever sits here next?" she asked. "What would we warn them about?" Julian asked. "Angles," she said. "And the way courage looks like a napkin dropped at the right time." They wrote, "If you're reading this, pay attention. The story you're in might be asking for you to be brave. Drop the napkin. Look up." They signed with initials that now matched. Near midnight, they stepped into a courtyard that echoed with snow. Vienna did its quiet winter magic. Julian offered his arm. Mira took it. "Any regrets?" he asked. "Just one," she said, and he almost tripped. "That we can't go back and tell our earlier selves how well this ends." "We did tell them," he said. "We left notes." They laughed like people who had survived their own prologues. Back in New York, they would argue about budgets, fall asleep over spreadsheets, kiss between meetings. They would learn the names of junior analysts in Geneva and the favorite tea of a clerk in Budapest who would send them forms at midnight because she believed, too, they would fight a dozen smaller wars and win most of them. They would buy a kettle for the office and a rug for the living room and plants. They would forget to water and then remember in time. But for one snow-loud night in Vienna, the future stood very still to be photographed. Two people who had built a bridge from proof to mercy and walked across it hand in hand. Justice had not made them whole. They had done that part themselves. Love had not saved them. It had given them the courage to finish saving each other. The chandeliers of Lumen glittered somewhere far away, throwing light at the dark, as they always had. The angles were good. The cameras were off. The note this time was not a warning but a promise.